Welcome to another More to Life Conversations program. This time it's topical perspectives with Hardin Tibbs. Hardin has done an excellent program for us a few months back, very well received, so we're extremely fortunate to have him again with us today. Hardin is a professional futurist who assists organizations in thinking about the future. His work has spanned many different topics and industries around the world over more than 30 years. His aim is to both make the future visible and to provide a source of hope. So I'm going to pass over to you, Hardin, to say a few words before we get on to the questions. Hello.
Okay, hello. Good to see you.
Good to
Well,
see you.
there are 5 questions that have been submitted, which you've sent to me, and I've got them on the screen in front of me. And one thing that I would say in looking at them, and I apologize, I'm suffering from the tail end of flu here, is that they have a somewhat pessimistic outlook on the future. They all reflect a pessimism. And I think that's not surprising because the media are bombarding us with negative images of the future and have been doing that for years, but it's particularly intense at the moment. So we have fears of technology, fears of economy, fear of AI, fear of the environment. It's, you know, the world is going to a hell in a handbasket and we're all going to be doomed, you know, it's the end of it. Well, this is, of course, to join in this is in a way means that you're alert to the issues. It's like, well, you're sensitive to these concerns, and so of course you'd be concerned, you'd be pessimistic. But actually, as somebody who thinks about the future all the time, and I've been doing this for decades now, there are very often, or typically, there are things people are afraid of at any one time, which turn out not to be true. So part of the trick is, well, which bits, you know, which bits are not going to be true out of this unfortunate situation. However, I think it is true that we are, as a species, as a planet, we're going through some kind of crisis transformation. And if you think of this as, you know, the old world is kind of heading down, and there's maybe a new world coming up. And if you fasten your attention on the old world that's descending, everything's a disaster. But if you fasten your attention on the world that's coming up, the whole way of seeing reality that's rising, then it looks much more optimistic. But the media, of course, neglect whatever it is that might be on the rise. They only focus on the old because I guess they're part of the old world. So I try to do my best to make the case for optimism in spite of all the apparent disaster. And that's what I will attempt to do today. So there are, of course, you know, in thinking about the future, there are various tools. And one of the main tools is scenarios, different pictures of the future. Well, as soon as you say they're different, they capture different kinds of things that could happen in an attempt to not be trapped in one kind of gloomy view. So there are clearly some negative scenarios in play. And there are rather neglected what I might call upside scenarios. And one of the key upsides is, well, sometimes goes under the heading of a transformational future. Something transforms in our assumptions about the world. And I think the key thing that seems to be at the heart of these transformation scenarios, if you went back to the 60s, everybody was very optimistic because of technology. You had Concorde and you had moonshots and you had lasers and all sorts of things. And it made it look as if technology was going to save us. Well, we have almost the opposite view now. We think technology is going to doom us. But I think that the one thing that is there as a potential upside is a shift in consciousness, a spiritual shift, an opening up of a dimension of human existence and experience, which is not acknowledged in the materialistic view. You know, the materialistic view is like a horizontal line. Everything is material. Everything is reduced to material. All explanations are material. But the spiritual dimension that opens up a kind of vertical dimension. You know, there's something more than just sits on this horizontal material line. And it's that opening up, which of course your programs are all about that, of course. But the key thing from my point of view is that this opening up of a vertical opens up a dimension of hope, because transformation and change is possible because of the kind of leavening effect of this spiritual input. And I think that's what really fundamentally alters the assumptions behind a lot of the gloom and doom, if you like. And
So
so
I was just going to say, I mean,
yes.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I suppose my question to that is, yes, I've certainly seen a raising of consciousness in my lifetime, but is it going to be enough? There's as you say, as you rightly say, there's so much fear around at the moment. I mean, yes, from the media, but also talking to people, talking to people even that have some sort of spiritual concept or feel themselves to be spiritual on a spiritual path. There is quite a lot of fear. I mean, I'm saying this, I'm sorry to butt in here, but I think this is quite an important point. Years and years ago, this rather bizarre man who thought he was some sort of master, well, it's very debatable whether he was or not, but he said to me, we need 144,000 people to make that transformation for the, as you say, the upside to happen. Well, of course, I mean, 144,000 is perhaps ridiculous, but when we're talking about fear as opposed to the spiritual, I wonder what you thought about that. I mean, is it a case of how many people are working a spiritual life, or what? How do you see that shift coming? You've made this comment about the crossover, so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, Hardin.
Yes. I'm sorry if you can hear my little dog in the background. There's somebody at the door.
Oh, that's lovely.
Not sure if it comes through on this microphone. Well, yes, these in the whole esoteric side of things, there are lots of prophecies, of course, and
Yeah,
critical numbers of people. And part of that seems to be the idea that out of the many millions who are alive on the planet, you actually only need this tiny sort of catalytic number to transform. It's like the sort of 100th monkey kind of idea.
yeah, yeah,
Once a few get it, then everybody gets it. It sort of
yeah,
spreads. But so I certainly have looked at these kinds of models, if you like. But I think the thing that has become clear to me more recently is that if you simply think that the coming of a sort of spiritual awakening or something like that is all it's working against is a kind of apathy, that is somehow missing the point that there are actually those people out there who don't want this to happen. And
yeah,
so there is a kind of resistance. And
yeah,
I think you could very well make the argument that what's happening at the moment is this is the maximum point of resistance, because I think we're very close to a breakthrough. But this is when, the ones that don't want that to happen are going to redouble their efforts. And
yeah,
one of the key ways of stopping it happening is to increase fear.
yes,
And if you use fearful narratives, that's an excellent way of doing it. And one of the key fearful narratives is fearful futures. So
yeah,
everything's falling apart. It's going to be disaster, and then everybody kind of contracts, and you lose that kind of leavening aspect. But I do think it's there. I do think it's happening, and I do think we're on the threshold of something quite amazing. But as they say, sometimes it's darkest before dawn. This kind of thing.
yes,
But out of the many years I've been looking at this happening, decades now, I think we really are at some kind of transformational point. And in terms of my crossover diagram, I think we're right at that point of crossover. But the dominant culture that's coming down isn't going to be very happy about losing its dominance. So of course it fights. So that crossover point is a point of contention. It's a point of resistance.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, okay, there's an awful lot that we could talk about here. I'd like to pick up on something you said in your previous talk, Hardin. You
Okay.
said you said something like it's going to be wonderful because more people will be released or have more time. And because I'm a very how-to person, if you can describe it like that, I'm thinking, okay, so if with modern technology and whatever is going to release people from some of the arduous tasks that they had in the past, but how are people going to provide on a financial level? So we could be talking about mass unemployment for a start, and I mean, I think that's already happening. So what happens to those people that would normally have gone into a job that is now taken over by modern technology? And there'll be hundreds, thousands, possibly millions. How is society going to cope with that from the very sort of mundane, practical, how do people survive level? That's something that sort of came to me from your last talk. I wonder if you could say something
Yeah.
about that.
Well, I think this notion, if you have this idea of transformation of some kind, then everything, in a sense, has to transform. All the
Yeah.
features of society that we know about, that we're familiar with, would have to transform. And that means the economics transforms, all the social aspects transform, as well as technology and so forth. So in a kind of way, we're thinking about, well, I think in terms of the sort of mixture of a sort of spiritual scenario and a science fictional scenario. And you end up with something a bit like, the world you see in Star Trek, which of course is pitched a couple of hundred years into our future. And whenever Star Trek, revisits the planet on its journeys through space, the planet itself, this, Earth, the home planet, is very peaceful. It's very nice. Everybody is following their bliss, as Joseph Campbell used to say. There's nobody in poverty and so forth. So this is like, you could say, what's like a kind of utopia. But actually, if uh, if you see the existing power structure, the existing economic structure, and the assumptions we make about money and work and so forth as part of a power structure that existed
Mm,
in modernity and even for maybe centuries before that, in which one part of humanity basically is in control of another part of humanity and is rich and the other part isn't rich. And so, this is something we take for granted, that's just real life, But what if that were to fundamentally change? What if the basis for that changed? And the basis changed because for all sorts of reasons, but the key thing would be the money system would break down, the existing money system, and be replaced by something else. And we see the beginnings of that with things like cryptocurrencies. I just say the
mm,
beginnings because it's got to be something more than that, and potentially a return to what is called by economists sound money. It's a gold-based money instead of debt-based money and this kind of thing, because debt-based money is a political control instrument which has been around for centuries, but we
yeah.
don't think of it in those terms. And normally, there has been no opportunity for thinking of it in any other way. We just have to deal with what we've got. But if we really are in a point of a transformation, then it includes all of that, I think. And so the old system basically breaks down in this transformation. The power system breaks down and something else comes in. Well, you would think, well, it's going to be chaos. There's nothing in the wings, is there? Well, maybe there is. So maybe we're just not seeing it. Maybe we're not being told about it. Maybe there are plenty of initiatives there, in the grassroots that could come forward if only people had a chance. So I see it more in those terms. And there
Right.
is, of course, all of these technology questions. In the questions we had were concerns about,
Yeah.
it's not, we'd have, in the science, the kind of optimistic science fiction that we've seen. We've seen films along these kind of lines. There is all kinds of technology, which is what used to be called labor-saving technology, robots, uh, things that would do things for us. But the problem, as you say, is, well, how does that happen without there being destitution at the same time? Well, there are some scenarios in which it's not, having robots turns out to be rather nasty. And we are the slaves and the robots are in charge. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like, as with any technology, it can be, we should be in charge. And if we are, then the robots are designed to support us. There's Isaac Asimov's famous three laws that the robots basically look out for the humans. Well, all of this is possible. And it's in a sense it's up to us. Now, we said, well, people don't feel powerful; they don't feel like they're going to influence very much. But I think there's a huge amount of churn, of change happening behind the scenes, and that's what we're not seeing. And I think that, in a sense, the Star Trek future, it's been portrayed for us. We can see a kind of future because there's a spirituality in Star Trek. If you go back and you look at those episodes, there's this
Yeah.
continuous spiritual theme going on,
Yes.
that is all down to human consciousness and this kind of thing, as well as all this fancy spacefaring technology and so on. And it's this combination of the kind of high tech, the enlightened outlook and the spirituality all together. That's really the hallmark of the future that I think we're moving towards.
I wonder what your definition or your explanation of what being spiritual is.
Well, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Um, I mean, I've kind of alluded to it by gesturing this idea of a vertical dimension. But this in it, this is symbolic. That the horizontal is the world, and the world of spirit is the vertical. And the symbolic vertical dimension refers to being, refers to levels of being. And so at the top of this dimension, you have source. You have, well, if you might want to use the word God if you want to use the word God, but the source of everything or everything. There's the unified totality is at the top. And at the bottom is the most differentiated kind of being that is farthest from the center, in a way of putting it, spiritual center. And these layers of being, which in the world, it goes between human beings, animals, plants, and sort of minerals. This is the traditional great chain of being, and that this is the differentiation here is a dimension of consciousness. It's a dimension of awareness. But I think not just consciousness, but also the power that goes with consciousness, because these beings have increasing power as they rise up this scale. So this word spiritual, to me, it refers to the idea that it's not just, that we are biological machines, part of a horizontal world of material, complex material things, but that there is actually this qualitative difference, which we can talk of in terms of consciousness, a difference of consciousness. There is a difference of consciousness between plants and human beings. And people say, well, no, but that doesn't really mean anything. But that's because in the material way of thinking, consciousness is nothing but the result of the operating of the human biocomputer. This idea that is generated by the brain. But in a spiritual perspective, the brain is a receiver of consciousness, is not the generator of consciousness. Consciousness is something fundamental in the universe, as intelligence may be as well. And this point of view, of course, is coming through more and more now. There are more and more people interested in consciousness research, more and more people who are pointing to the idea that, well, maybe consciousness actually is fundamental, and maybe it comes before matter, and that matter somehow condenses out of, thought forms or something like that. Which these ideas go back to Platonism. They go back to almost 2,000 years. We're just rediscovering them. So
Yes,
I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, it's something that's irked me, that last point, because when I was doing my research, I came across an Italian school in 1700. I forget now the name of it. But when I looked at it, it was absolutely exactly what we're trying to do at I&I. And at first I was really excited by finding this out. And then I thought, well, this is like 300, 400 years ago. Why hasn't it changed? Why haven't we moved on? It's like, as you say, it goes back in time. It goes back to Plato, Socrates, all those things. Even if you like, might even go back to Egypt or whatever. And yet we're still, on the whole, seem to be stuck. I mean, I absolutely take your point about the consciousness and as you say, that the G word, I call it, the God word, is something that irritates a lot of people. But if you call it the source, and that is part of everything, then I'm absolutely with you. As I say, I'm a how-to person. So, to me, what makes a difference is not just maybe going into wonderful meditations like going to church once on a Sunday or something, but is actually living it. And I think it's living it, and it's not difficult, actually. To live it is not difficult because it's like you're aligned. You can touch it, you can feel it, you know that there's a knowing here, a sense of knowing. I think someone described it as. So it's there, but in some ways it seems so far away from most people as you relate to the media and things and the fear and so forth. It's very difficult to put that across, that even the small things, the day by day things, make a
Yeah,
difference energetically, makes a
yeah.
difference to one's life, to other people's lives. It's not about sometimes the huge things, it's about everyday things. I mean, that's the way I think about it. You may or may not agree with that, Hardin, but and once you're in that sort of alignment, it becomes really easy. It's not a difficult thing. It's not like something you have to force yourself to do, because it is blatantly obvious when you're in that. So I don't know. My hope is
Well,
that,
it reminds me of that Buddhist thing, before enlightenment, carrying wood and chopping wood and carrying water. After enlightenment, chopping wood and carrying water. So
yeah,
everyday life continues. But
yes,
if you think of this vertical dimension idea, that this is a vibratory scale, and
yeah,
that to move up the scale is to increase your vibration. I know this is kind of popular talk, but basically, it's moving out of fear is going to take you down that scale, and
mm,
hope, optimism, being happy are going to take you up that scale. So
yeah,
just on a day-to-day basis,
yeah,
to keep your, well, what should you call it? I mean, at one level, sort of mood, your internal state, your feeling. Are you sinking into fear? Are you sinking into
yeah,
concerns and worries and so forth and getting heavy, you know, or are you feeling lighter? And are you kind of rising up the scale, trying to keep yourself higher
yeah,
up the scale? So just in very practical terms, and the more people who, tend towards higher up on the scale, then the whole situation lifts.
yeah. It's about awareness, isn't it? It's about being aware.
Well, yeah, being
That's the word I would.
monitoring, yes, monitoring your own state, checking
Mm,
your own state, and lifting your own state, rather
yes,
than just sinking, thinking, oh, there's nothing I can do. Because the very first thing you can do is to pay attention to your own state.
yes, exactly, absolutely, yeah.
And then if you believe
I
all, yeah,
in some of my classes that I do, that we do, I often say, once or twice a week, just stop, whatever you're doing, brushing your teeth, whatever, just stop for a minute. Where is your energy? Where are your thoughts? Where are your emotions? And then, is that a good use of your energy? And it's amazing just asking that question. It becomes so blatantly obvious. But if you're spending your life thinking about something from the past, or you're thinking about something that may or may not happen in the future, your energy is skewed. It sort of
mm,
brings you back into
yeah,
present time. And it's again, it's about awareness. Yeah.
yeah. And I think
Okay. Oh,
another thought I had there about this question of obsessing about the future is that if it is the case, and as we're told that by spiritual people that it is, that what you focus on, it becomes part of your experience. Let me put
mm,
it like that, which is
yeah,
kind of stated like that. It's kind of obvious. Then, if you focus on bad futures, you're drawing to yourself a bad future. So there's another
yeah.
reason not to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm wondering, it's very interesting because obviously your background, you've assisted organizations and things like that. So, how do you put that across to people that may be in the very materialistic world? How does that come across? How do you explain that to those people? I wonder.
Well, it depends on what the opportunity is. A lot of the commercial work is very mundane. It's just looking at the things that could happen. But I always like to find an optimistic pathway. So if people say, well, we can only see a terrible scenario, well, surely, come on, you must be able to imagine some condition under which things get better.
Right.
A boss of mine in California was a very well-known business futurist, and he always used to say to our clients, never forget the upside shock. I'm sure that was a nice way of the surprise, optimistic outcome. Whoa, didn't see that one coming. So,
Well, as we think where we put our energy, as you rightly say, that's going out, and that definitely has an effect. I know you've looked at the questions, and to some extent, you've answered some of them. I'm going to ask you one that was very insistent from Angela, who from the USA. And she asked very specifically, how are the next 4 years going to be for the USA, for the
yes.
people? I wondered if you could say just a few words about that, Hardin.
Well, I suppose this question refers to the new president who's just been elected.
I imagine so,
And
yes.
I suspect that this question reflects a concern that might not go too well.
Yeah.
So first of all, I'd say, well, I pick my terms carefully here. Um, what this new president represents in many ways is somebody who is opposed to the old power structure, regardless of what you may think of him as a person. And he's certainly been portrayed in an extremely negative way, which is
Hmm.
perhaps no accident. So we don't really know too much about what he might be like. Um, but well, several things come to mind here. But so I think we have to be careful not to swallow hook, line, and sinker the negative portrayal that's been made.
Yeah.
Another thing I think is that he is whatever he represents is it's not him personally as the kind of crazy man who's going to cause total chaos, which is the way it's presented. He is not exactly a figurehead, but he's the guy out on the stage in the front, behind a movement consisting of a much larger number of people,
Yeah.
which is not really to do with government and it's not really to do with politics. It's to do with what I think of as, the struggle going on at this crossover point. And the struggle is basically between a group of people who wish to continue the control politics of the past and a group of people who would like to bring in a broader regime of freedom. Let's put it like that. So between control and freedom. And I think, however surprising it might sound, Mr. Trump represents that side that is looking for freedom. And one of the markers, I think, of this will be this whole, for example, the so-called disclosure movement going on in Washington. I don't know if you've been following that, but there's a kind of power struggle going on behind the scenes in Washington and has been for a few years now about the government disclosing what it knows about intelligent extraterrestrial contact.
Right.
And the allegation is made that the government knows a great deal about this, and the government is in contact with these people, and that the government has cooperative technology projects underway and all sorts of things, which are really quite exciting and do take us towards that Star Trek kind of future. And I think that, if all is going well, we will see this new incoming administration open the doors to that disclosure, and that we will see what is sometimes called open contact within the next 2 or
Wow.
3 years. And
As an old Trekkie, I think that sounds absolutely wonderful.
yeah, so I think there's a few markers you can see like that, and I think you'll see big economic change, some of the fundamental economic changes I've mentioned, which will probably be the end of the debt-based US money system as we've known it.
Wow.
Possibly the end of the US as a corporation, becoming a true republic, things like that. All these things have been hinted at.
Mm.
But of course, the mainstream media, they don't, this is all rubbish. This is nonsense. That couldn't possibly be happening.
Mm.
So I think don't worry too much is what I would say. Look for the good signs. And I think this, although people are apprehensive about, for example, extraterrestrial contact, because, it could be horrible, I think it's going to turn out to be on the good side. Let's put it like that. And I
Oh,
think there's
well,
going to be a
uh,
lot of upside surprise, upside shock.
on a lighter note, I often like to ask people this question, which is a bit silly in a way, but I say, if a spaceship landed in your garden and an extraterrestrial came out and waved you in to come into the spaceship, would you go? Now, most people say no because they might eat me or something. And I say, well, I definitely go, especially at my age. If they want to eat me, that's fine. Give some nourishment to the extraterrestrial, but I don't have much knowledge of that. But I mean, what you're saying is, to me, my Star Trek mind is wonderful. But on that subject, what I feel that is a plus with Trump is actually the plus is his unpredictability, that he's actually not afraid to go with things that are not usual, and that could be a big plus in my mind, not a minus. So, here we are, we've got that. And obviously, there's something much deeper than any of us probably know that are going on a much more subtle level. And I do think that in some way, shape, or form, he is part of that. I don't know, that's just an intuition. But I say just an intuition. I shouldn't say just an intuition, should I? But so, like you, I am cautiously positive, actually, with that. And and the breakdown of societies that we're seeing is interesting as well. And I think some of the wars that are happening are very much part of that breakdown of societies. Don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely abhorrent to any war or any violence, but I can see that, as you say, that chaos point that you've talked about is somehow that's tied up in what is going on. And that is not to say that one has the most incredible sympathy and compassion for the people that are tied up in it, which must be horrendous. But somehow or other, it feels like it's part of this chaos time. I don't know what you would like to say about that, if anything, Hardin.
Well, I think that it is the breakdown of the old
Yeah,
power system.
yeah, yeah.
And that, of course, the more closely allied you are in practice or in your thinking with the old power system, the more disturbing that's going to be. And certainly, this new U.S. president is disruptive, as you say. He does
Yeah.
unexpected things. He does different kinds of things than the old power system might want. And of course, the easiest thing for them to do to fight back is to portray this as just total chaos. That this
Yeah.
guy is completely crazy. He doesn't follow any of the conventions. He's a
Mm,
dangerous menace, and
mm,
he should be got rid of. As opposed to, if you think about somebody who might come in, who would make all of the positive changes that might be wanted, they would look the same to the old power system, like a dangerous threat, because they're
yeah,
going to take away the basis of the old power system.
yeah,
The
yeah.
uh, the real challenge is going to come in introducing the new power system. Our
Mm,
ability to for the first time in a way, and if it is real freedom that we're moving into, to not to operate under a system of oppression, which we're used to doing. We can accommodate ourselves to oppression. As somebody in Russia said to me some years ago, we're very used to living under totalitarianism. Well, yes, but we all are in a way. But now that the challenge is going to be, can we live under freedom? Are we going to be able to organize ourselves voluntarily to create the future we want in a condition of freedom? And that's the challenge coming up.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I must say, it's always incredibly fascinating to talk to you, Hardin. And my head is kind of swimming with all sorts of things. But I think for this session, I do hope you'll come back at another time.
Mhm.
But at this session, perhaps you could finish by saying something that will open our hearts to the future.
Well, I think it's about time try. I think we are at the turning point of that golden age which has been promised for a long time, and it may seem unlikely just at the moment, but I really do think that's coming, and we are right at that point. And the forces that don't want that are playing their last cards now, and we are
Mm.
within a very short time of a really fantastic future.
Mm. I remember, as you're saying that, I remember I knew Sir George Trevelyan quite well towards the end of his life. I'm sure you did as well. And he used to be very excited about this. He said, I want to be alive to see this. And of course, he was by then in his 90s. And I feel the same. I want to be alive to see this.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we may well be in the generation that does see it now. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, I
Yeah,
remember Sir George.
interesting. Can I just sort of finish? And when back in 30 years ago, or however long it was, when I was getting lots of channeled information, there was one thing that I couldn't understand at the time, and I'm really beginning to now. And it went something like, that's my generation, sort of baby boomer generation. We are the gatekeepers. We're opening the door for the new, but we must close the door behind us. And I think of all the things you said, it's like, yes, okay. So here we are coming into the new, opening the door, but we have to leave the past behind us. And I think on so many levels, I now see that that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and there are going to be things about the past that we will be sad to lose,
Yes,
but
yes.
that's just where we are. We've had hundreds of years of a certain way of operating on this planet, and it's about to change. And it is fantastically wonderful, but at the same time quite scary, yes.
Well, I take your positive note there, Hardin, and I thank you so much once again. And as I said, I hope that we can have you back again as the year progresses. Anyway, bless you and thank you.